String of overdoses ripped through Anne Arundel County. Police say more than a dozen people overdosed in just one day. 3 died. This as the governor declares a state of emergency in response to Maryland's ongoing crisis with heroin and opioid addiction.
A patient will be admitted to the ER for overdosing. Hours later, when they're released, they could end up back in the same spot for overdosing yet again.
Last year, roughly 1,200 people died from drug overdoses statewide, nearly half of those in Baltimore City. 16 reported opiate overdoses in just one day.
35 drug overdoses just last weekend.
Pain that I probably just can't even explain.
It's completely shattered our family.
This completely changed her.
In light of it being Drug Awareness Month, we, as a part of SADD Club, decided to explore the realities of addiction and its effects on society. To separate myth from truth, we interviewed 3 people in recovery about their past, their struggles, and how they got to where they are today.
Heading down a bad path, I just got goosebumps. I feel like we know when we're heading down the wrong path, like it doesn't fit inside of our souls.
What these people went through created lessons that they live by today. These lessons could be helpful to young people who are vulnerable to the same pitfalls in their own lives.
I'm from Orlando, Florida, and also from Charlotte, North Carolina. And now I live here in the DC, Maryland area. Asking about my story, not only personally, but like with my experience with addiction, I think most importantly is really to kind of like go back to what I know is the earliest stages of when that stuff started to present itself. You know, I think so often the drug dependence and just the different really I feel like those compulsive behaviors that people can get into really can stem from all sorts of things, you know, and they present themselves as children, in my opinion, is like this just feeling of inadequacy and fear and not being a part of things that are going on around you. And the best way I've heard it described is like being in a room with the people you love the most, you know, with your family, with your friends, and really feeling like there's just something wrong with me. Like I don't fit in here, you know, and you're surrounded by the people that love you the closest, you know, and I think for me as a child, you know, I definitely had those as early as I can remember, and I could never put words to the feelings, you know, and I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. I didn't grow up with drugs or anything like that around me, you know, and that first night that I drank, it was as if like, you know, the sounds in my mind or the feelings inside just went away just enough. It was like that knob of volume got like turned down, and I didn't even quite know what was existing within me. Like I said, I couldn't put words to it. It was just sensations, until it got quiet enough that I realized that, oh my gosh, it was like peace. It was kind of quiet. And you know, another simple equation was that if this does that feeling for me, then I've got to chase that. And I think really, you know, as a 18, 19, 20-year-old addict, like all that I wanted was to be okay in my own skin. All that I wanted was to open up, like wake up in the morning and start my day like feeling okay and that I was enough. And for me, like I first had to put the drugs and alcohol down and then, you know, start to pursue a path to find that feeling. And you know, it was much simpler once I got in and started doing some of the work than I really thought it was going to be. So, yeah, and then today I wake up in the morning and, you know, I do have a life that I'm excited about, and I feel good in my skin. And I've been able to repair the damage, because, you know, like, my gosh, if we had all the time in the world, like there's so many stories and so much wreckage, right? Like I feel we earn our seats in recovery, you know, by doing a whole host of things out there. And it's not because we're bad people or people with addictions are bad people. Like we're big-hearted and we're inherently good people. We're just really, really sick. And there's so much misconception that's around that, right? Because if you saw somebody struggling with addiction and they were stealing things, you'd think, my God, what a bad, like, that's terrible, what a bad person. But the reality is, like, if you're struggling with addiction, like, you might wake up in the morning and you don't know how not to do what you need to do. And it's just, I mean, it's, like, amazing to not have those things anymore.
I'm 29 years old. I grew up in Guilford, Connecticut. It's where I reside now, not in Guilford, but in New Haven. But grew up there majority of my life. I've been in 12 treatment centers from the ages of 17 to 21. I went in and out of treatment, in and out of treatment, and in and out of more treatment. And really kind of just continued the spiral down. Pretty much everything that I could get my hands on, I would do. Alcoholism runs in my family for sure. Alcoholism and addiction. My father has been in recovery for 25 years. My grandmother's in recovery. I have an uncle in recovery, and I have a couple people kind of in and out of recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And I was dating this older guy, and I remember I was at a party, and there was a ton of people there, and I was at my ex-boyfriend's house, and I was 16 years old. And we drank a ton, and I walked into the bathroom and someone was breaking out lines of cocaine. And the first time I tried cocaine, I did 14 lines and nearly landed myself in the hospital. And kind of set out from there to really like make it my mission to feel that way again. I think I definitely had an idea that I drank and used drugs differently than other kids. But I think that I really believe that at that point I thought that I could go back to drinking and smoking pot. Like I could go back to what it used to be like, you know, a few years prior. I definitely didn't want to go to treatment. I don't know if it was necessarily that I was in denial about my drug use. It was more so that I didn't want to be looked down upon, looked different. So my parents said they were shipping me off for 2 weeks, and I stayed there for 4 months. They left me in an adolescent facility. That's where I graduated high school. I wasn't allowed to come home. And I will tell you that that was the first treatment center, but not the last.
Okay, how's it going?
So my name is Sam Bierman, and I am a former heroin addict that's been clean and sober for over 10 years. And originally, or a little bit about my story, is I grew up in New York on Long Island in a town called Roslyn. I had a really good childhood, and when I was 12 years old, my mother got cancer and ended up pretty much for like 6 months when she had cancer. I saw her health very quickly deteriorate, and then she passed away. And so after she passed away, I had, you know, obviously like all these feelings inside that I didn't know what to do with, and, you know, as a 12-year-old kid that just lost his mother, and, you know, so I bottled up a lot of my feelings and like kept a lot of stuff inside. And so I had like this intense amount of pain inside. And so when I had my first drink, which is probably around like 12 and a half, 13 years old, I had a very like euphoric feeling from the drink. And so like all of the stuff from my mother passing away and all of life stressors and everything like that, the drink was able to ease that pain and comfort me in a way that I had never really felt before. And so there was this natural part of me that just wanted more of it, because when I didn't have it, it felt like when I was going through life in middle school and high school and I wasn't high or I wasn't drunk, it literally felt like everybody in the world was breathing just like a little bit easier than I was, and that everybody else had this like manual on life, and like I just kind of got skipped over, and like I really had a very difficult time like functioning to like the norms of society without being high or drunk. And so naturally I wanted more, and so my addiction progressed to a point where you know, I would drink and then I would build up tolerance physically to alcohol, and then it wouldn't have the same effect on me as it once did, and then I would move to something harder. So then I would move to cocaine or Xanax or anything. Eventually, I ended up with opiate painkillers, and which led me to heroin. And then once I found heroin, I stopped searching because it was just so euphoric for me and so emotionally and life numbing to me that I didn't really feel like to search for anything else. I felt like I had arrived, that I had found it. I tried to do what a lot of my friends were doing after college, which was move to New York City and start life and start adulthood and get a girlfriend and get an apartment and get a job and all that type of stuff. And I tried doing that, and I failed miserably at it. And by this point, based on my behavior, I'd been arrested before and a number of other consequences that I had faced. I ended up homeless in Brooklyn for the next year and a half, kind of jumping around from abandoned house to abandoned house, just pulling whatever scheme I pretty much had to do to get money, to go get high, to get my next fix. When you're living like that, it's a very, like, every day feels like a year. It's horrendous. There's very little ways to describe like the feelings that you go through with it. It's really an emotionally draining life. And so after doing that for about a year and a half, I ended up in the hospital because I had a massive infection from injecting needles. That was the first time I ever asked for help. And so I asked him for help, and he sent me to rehab, and he sent me to treatment. My first time in treatment, I wasn't really, like, I had this really big idea of like what addiction was, and I definitely knew that I had a problem, but I really thought the drugs were like my main problem. Like, I thought the actual physical drugs, like if I just stopped doing drugs, that my problems would go away, And so what happened is that theory kind of got disproven to me. Was when I got out, I went to 12-step meetings, and I saw a therapist, and I did all the things that I was told I had to do, was supposed to do to stay sober and live a healthy life. And I stayed sober for about 6 months, and I was more suicidal and miserable than I had ever been in my entire life using. And what was pointed out to me at the time, and what I realized at that time after like going through some more stuff, was that, what addiction is, like, the drugs are just the symptom of the problem. It's the same thing if you have bronchitis and you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a cough suppressant. A cough suppressant doesn't treat the infection bronchitis, it just treats the cough. And cough is a symptom of bronchitis. Does that make sense? And so I realized that the drugs were not necessarily my problem, that I was suffering from a very serious illness that was created internally and then manifesting itself externally. And what I was in was an intense amount of spiritual, emotional, and mental pain, and therefore I would reach to anything to try to ease that pain. But like, the pain and the turmoil that was going on inside of me was the real root of the illness. I had been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, bipolar, everything from when I was a young age, from pretty much since my mom passed away till I got sober. And none of it ever felt right to me because medications didn't work for me, the therapy didn't work for me. Granted, I was lying to the therapist and the doctors the whole time, but none of that stuff worked for me, and I really couldn't figure out why. Like, I couldn't figure out, if this is what I'm suffering from, then why aren't these medications and the therapies and the other things that are working for other people, why is that not working for me? So when somebody pointed out like the real root of addiction and the real problem of alcoholism and addiction to me, it was the first time that I felt, much better about it, and I had like some peace and calm come over me that finally, like, I know what I'm suffering from. So for the past 10 years, I guess what my life has been like in sobriety is that I've tried to live by a certain set of principles that were pointed out to me that could keep me sober, and that I've tried to improve my life in a number of ways. I've gone back to school and gotten additional degrees. I've obviously started my own business. I have, all my family relationships with my immediate family, my grandparents and my cousins and everybody are really good. And I've been able to progress in life, like, through sobriety really well. experience is that between high school and college, most administrations don't really know how to deal with these situations. And so what they resort to a lot of times are expelling students, punishing them, putting them on suspension, and kind of having this police-like mentality of, we have to catch this person, they're not good for the school, they're not good for the other students, etc., etc. And so what I would much prefer to see happen is that instead of taking those kind of police-like actions, they take much more of like a therapeutic role and sit the kid down and talk to him and find out what is going on in his life. Find out what is going on with that person. I mean, in high school, you're dealing with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids that, you know, a lot of times they are not malintended, you know, in what they're doing. They sometimes don't know any better, they don't have the education, and they need support and they need help. And so what I'd much rather see schools do is take much more of a personalized approach to it and really sit down people, find out what's going on, bring in their families if they have to bring in their families, and express concern rather than just swiftly place blame and put punishments in place.